Whenever I say the word robots, quite often, probably, most people are thinking about something extremely modern. You're thinking about transformers and things like that, or things that build cars in a modern day and flip stuff around and weld it real quick, or things along that line. Or you're thinking about cute little robots that do little dances now that they've created that hold themselves up and do things. And now they're starting to make them to where they can jump and do different things like that, and of course working on a exoskeleton, which would effectively be the same thing, and you just put a person in it. One wonders how far that would go, and if you would just eventually hit a button and automate it, and it would do it itself and carry you along. If it wasn't done right, though, that'd probably just rip the person apart or break you into pieces. But that's that's going out in left field before I even get started. One of my first experiences with something like robots was whenever I was a kid and I watched Fritz Lang and the ancient movie Metropolis, where it showed a robot woman. And that was pretty neat. And of course, during my age of growing up, there were a lot of robots in things that showed up. And of course, Danger Will Robinson from Lost in Space and all kinds of things. And of course, C-3PO, which in a way was inspired directly from Fritz Freeling's movie. But also I found that there's this movie about the ancient tale of Perseus and Clash of the Titans that this depiction here of Bubo, the owl, comes from. And if you'll remember the story, the goddess didn't want to give up her sacred owl and made Hephaestus either build armor for Bubo, which would have probably been too heavy for him to even fly with, or they rebuilt a robotic version of it that could take its place, along with the other weapons that they had given him that was by the gods, formed by Hephaestus. Well, in the ancient Greeks, there's a lot of tales like that. But some people think about the father of robotics and they go back to like Michelangelo and certain people that had deals that whenever it rolled along, it would uncoil a rope that would allow this to do this, to that, and little mechanisms hooked up to cogs and wheels, much like a clockwork mechanism. And these clockwork androids that eventually were created out of it, but in elder times they had also these strange little ballerinas that would come out and do a dance, and her arms would go up and down and so on, really like an advanced form of a music box. Or they would have birds, much like Bubo here, and his mouth would move, and he would tweet due to a whistling. That now we found out that they used a little thin pipe, and water would be in it, and it would be released at a certain point. And whenever it did, that coincided with the movement, and so it looked as if he was tweeting. You know, in a modern day, we see something like the animatronics at Disneyland, and some people think of it as being archaic almost at this point, and just kind of meh. Well, they tried to get all of the jiggy-jaggy out of it and everything as much as they could and smooth it out and very much turn it into a Terminator type situation. And now they've got it pretty darn good in a lot of them. In the Hall of Presidents and so on, but it's in so many exhibits now, and Pirates of the Caribbean and all these other things. And they use other effects along with that. But make no doubt about it, that's a concept of a robot, even though he sets back down and the next one comes along, the light comes on, and it does it all again. But that's the Middle Ages and modern things. How deep does it go? Does it go back to this time? Well, you can find in times like this, in the ancient of Greek tales, that they already had this concept of robotic type of entities, most of which are created by Hephaestus, this incredible god, you know, that was the blacksmith of the gods, forged by the dwarven gods, and all of this that we go along with. But if you look, when people started mocking these concepts that came to mind, they came to fruition. The same way that early 1900s and people thought of Buck Rogers and so on. And what if we ended up making a gun or a cannon big enough to shoot somebody, put them in a cannonball and shoot them to the moon? Or maybe a different way, such as rockets, controlled by a computer robot. Well, we always talk about robots in space and a lot of the things that go along with that. But that idea comes from older too, and some of that comes to fruition. We have lasers and all these things that come from it. So, through these incredible minds of imagination, have created pretty much what's all around us today through a series of events, and a lot of it was trying to bring apart magic. Like TV and the devices I'm talking to you now is just the want for somebody to pass a message a little more clearly and of themselves directly between people. They say that writing was done so just so the king wouldn't be possibly taken out of context again. So apparently something had happened and they wanted to pass it on for that. That's another story about whole writing and everything, but you'll find that the Greeks talked about this term biotecnae. And, well, we know biotech today and everything you think of it. Well, a lot of words come from Greeks and so on, and technology and so on. And through linguistics and Latin and so on, we get these concepts that come off of it. But they talked about it long ago, and it's in a few of their stories. So I'm going to tell you some ancient tales of robots. Now, early as Homer in 650, 700 BC or so, he relayed stories of Hephaestus, he's this blacksmith of the gods who had created all kinds of things, but one of which was just his own shop itself. It was automated in certain ways. He had a bellows that worked exacting to heats as he needed. Like he could set it to where it only blew so much or so hard, and once he got it going, it would just keep maintaining that point, and he could set certain temperatures for certain things, all kinds of stuff, and he wouldn't have to adjust them. They were self-adjusting to his needs. He was said to have built automatic gates for heaven that just opened automatically for the gods whenever they came and showed up in their chariots and so on, would walk into heaven and close it. This is very much like automated doors today. Whenever you walk up to them and they open and so on and allow you in, and kids, whenever you see them, you think it's magic. Of course, adults have taken and just run it off. In fact, if you walk up and you have to stutter step for get it to do it, you're like, they need to adjust that. But how old are things like that? You know? Well, there was automated doors to temples that they created that they found out now, to a pressure point and everything else, and people would walk up and it would do it. In fact, before you got to go into there were coin operated machines that would dispense out holy water. All of this was a showing of the power of the gods and a way to pretty much set you on to show you that the gods were with these people, and that Hephaestus is making these stuff and all these things. It goes along. It's just fantastic, isn't it? Well, nowadays we see that as tricks, but we've talked about magic and how it was used in ancient times versus what you see today and so on. So it's a little bit different, but not much. And you look at it, and people a lot of times call things that show up that are extra special and show some ingenuity as modern magic for a reason. Hephaestus, and they even talked about self-driving delivery carts. Yep, they brought the god stuff and then headed back and so on, and instantly I start thinking about those ruts that we found all over Europe and all over places that are well ground and from long, long ago. And the story, one merchant thing tells you about that these donkeys and stuff, once you load them up and you get them going and you have a good leader, that they just go. Where? All the way to its destination. And they know it, and then they come back, and they go, and they come back. There are people that go with this along the road, but they don't have to have drivers necessarily. It's doing it itself. But that's not what we're talking about here, for this is like a auto taxi or auto type things, and we've got this type of deal going on now where we're trying to create something and they keep a certain distance and all those type of things away. But self-driving delivery carts of the gods who bring the gods favors is for a long time ago. Hephaestus himself had a crew of female androids. They were maidens of gold, helpers of Hephaestus they were called, in his workshop. Homer describes them as having all the knowledge of the gods, which apparently they wouldn't need necessarily, but they were equipped with reasoning, etc. And Hephaestus had made sure this happened so he could make all the other things happen. That, of course, people there, and they go, well, how does it work? And they go, oh yeah, well, they're gods. But these were all labor-saving devices for the gods, by the gods, but they were made by us. And when they were brought down to earth, they were thought to always be troublemakers and trouble brewing, and it's always kicked back in that way. For one famous tale that works with this is Prometheus. You know, Prometheus was the one that stole fire from man, and he actually created man by using clay and so on. And we know that similar thought. If you ever watch Clash of the Titans like this, you'd see where they had these little clay dolls and all laid up, and the world was arena, all the world's a stage, and he had fallen down, and he just stands him back up, says that's the way it is. But Hephaestus was commanded, because he stole fire from man, Hephaestus was commanded to forge a bronze eagle or raptor type creature to eat out the immortal's liver forever. But it's described as a robotic raptor. And in the tales of Jason and the Argonauts, he would arrive pretty much clockwork by the day, and he was observed as a golden, gleaming eagle overhead, and he made a whirling noise, a loud whirling noise, and they could see each feather upon its wings moving up and down like a row of oars. There's a depiction right here near this, if I could get this to stop and act right. For this looks something like this. And I know if you just look at the head, it's a duck. But it's something very much like this. And if you remember the story about Mars recently that they had, that movie that didn't play out so well, but John, I'm forgetting his name now, and it's just right on the tip of my tongue. I want to say John Connor. But in that tale, they had a whole lot of these ships that fly around like that, and they look like this, and a lot of people think they took inspiration from it. In fact, I think they said that they did. But everybody always says, oh, there's just an eagle and everything. Well, if you read the stories off into it, that's not necessarily true. It's a robotic raptor. And they could see its wings moving up and down and its feathers and everything separating. And so it in its whole description doesn't come across as the way that you think of, or is even commonly depicted on vases. Now, to punish mankind for this whole situation, over and above this, was made a beautiful woman. And in the story, she was supposed to be beautiful to deceive the men. And it even says it, oh man, I wish I could say it word for word in a colorful way that they do. But basically, to hide her evil. She is supposed to be in a beautiful, but within she's evil. and that they created her. That's Pandora, which linguistically works out to across the gods. She was made but not born, so basically she's a fembot to release evil on the earth. Epimetheus, which means hindsight, which is always 2020, is kind of used in that joke way that they do in the Greeks, where it showed that he didn't have that because Prometheus told him, don't take gifts from the gods and do this, that, and the other, because it's probably a setup, just like what was told to Enki, to Adama, that and that didn't give him immortality. In this situation, we have this. Prometheus, though, means forward looking, so they're kind of this yin and yang situation where one of them looks towards the future. And so he gave man fire and did all these things, but they didn't like that, so they released Pandora's box. Well, she was a created android type creature, and if you read the story, it's really not even a box, it's a jar. Yeah, it's a sealed jar. In fact, the idea that the only thing left was hope, and everybody looks at that as, oh, that's not necessarily so good. Some of those ancient theorists said that hope could be worked in a wrong way, too. You could sit and hope for something that's never going to happen, etc. I won't go into that and its modern connotations. So she was a fembot meant to release evil upon the earth. But she's much like, though, that robot in the Metropolis movie that we were talking about by Fritz Lang. I said Freeling, but Fritz Lang. And it's kind of strange that her name's Maria, or Mary. We won't go there. But make no mistake, that's kind of a C3PO situation. Way after that, we had different ones that looked different. I mean, you look at the Robbie the Robot and the way that he looked in Lost in Space, and a much more modern thing. I mean, these guys could fly through all, yeah, and still it looked like some kind of trash can with things hooked up onto it and a lot of lights blinking on and off. But this was trying to interject the idea of he had a computer in him, and I believe that they said that, well, even in the modern day, they wouldn't have a computer, so it had to be big. And how's all of his hydraulics and all of these type situations. But automatons to these gods and Greeks are okay for the gods, but they cause problems whenever they come down to humanity and we get a hold of them. Somebody could probably look back at that and say, oh, I can see what you kind of mean. Even fire. But even Talos, that giant bronze statue in the Ray Harryhausen movie, about the same situation. Y'all remember that? It's a bronze statue. Man, let me see if I can find a picture of Talos. There's got to be one. Well, there's a coin right there with him, and he's chunking a rock. And of course, he has eagle wings in that picture that's right here. Here's a little side offshoot. There's Talos there, but a terrible picture on the far left. Here he is off a Greek vase, but there he looks very much like a man. In fact, he has a tear coming from his eye. This is when they pull his plug. Literally. We'll get to that here in just a second, but let me see if I can find a decent picture of Talos that looks anything like what I want to talk about. There it is. Here's the Ray Harryhausen version of that. And now he's chasing him down in this giant bronze statue. You know, when you play D&D and stuff, there's a lot of times where a suit of armor, like we saw a minute ago, comes to life and does these things. Sometimes it's looked at as undead. There's an undead skeleton running that. They run into him in situations. Real popular in the Harryhausen movies, too. But make no mistake, this 40 to 60 foot tall Talos here is quite the foe. And he is the protector, if you will, of the island that King Minos lives on, of the Minoans. Oh, he's got another connection there too with having that. Also later with a bull and so on. But programmed to recognize non-locals, he hurls rocks, giant rocks at you, much like a catapult, huh? And if close, he would make its body fire red and grab and squeeze or hug people, roasting them. Yeah. Now, King Minos has a few things with him that have automatons and creatures that go along with us. We know the Minoans were an ancient, real advanced culture too, but Pasiphae, it's the wife of King Minos. You know the story where she falls in love with a bull, then she wants to get put inside of a bull because Zeus has been made himself into a bull, much like whenever he takes the queen over there in the other story here. And so there's one that's automated too in this situation. But and the great white bull that we know about, that they talk about, a lot of people know that later Pygmalion made a living statue, and it was basically a robot virgin. This brings about things where you start thinking about modern day sex dolls and silly things like that, but they had this thing back then that went along with it, with these living statues that were so realistic and would deify the gods, that people had such a love for the gods that they would fall in love with statues. There's a term even they made for it, was a gallophilia. It basically comes across as statue lust. Oh, we could go a lot more into that, but some of the things I probably couldn't talk about on Google or on YouTube. Anyhow, um, inner workings of this Talos right here. They even tell you that this thing is got a tube inside of it from head to toe, that like hydraulics, and ran through it, that was sealed, and it contained Ichor. Ichor. Ichor is blood of the gods. Ichor is what we call bug guts nowadays. You know, when it hits your windshield and that goo that's not really blood. Sealed with a bronze bolt at his ankle. Jason and the Argonauts would have been doomed, but they had someone special with them, the Sorceress Medea. Yeah, well, here we go again with Medea of the Medes, and actually gets Medusa and so on connected with it, but she has it with them. She realized that his drain, or how to drain his batteries, and so kind of in a way like he dies like Hal in the Space Odyssey. It's a weird connection, but there again we have something that's a computer that's running everything, and it gets shut down. They take and pull his plug, literally a bolt that's in him in his ankle, which holds it so they can drain in and out the ichor and so on to make him work, and in draining him out so he loses it. Like hydraulics in a tractor, and it pumps out its hydraulics and no longer works anymore. Yeah. Kind of like the giant spider in Wild Wild West and the way that they did that. Jason also in this Argonaut's tale, so in the earliest of tales here, it's in it, he has to fight two bronze bulls. They're automated bulls, and they're a hell of a thing here. He has to take them also and train them, like domesticate them, and plow a field with them. After which automatons or undead type warriors spring up. Medea gives Jason a potion of courage and giant strength, pretty much, and she also instructs them to hurl rocks, and then they would sense nearby foes and attack each other as they were programmed. But Medea was a divine hacker then, huh? Yeah, in the story, whenever he gets the bulls and everything to pull off, but here come those warriors, and they're even more screwed now, if you will. And they throw rocks and ting ting, and they can tell something around them is attacking them, so they start swinging, attacking each other, and then they're able to come in and take advantage of the situation. It's by trickery and everything, but make no bones or qualms about it. Talos is a common name for security devices, also for security companies. It's also the name of the first automated missiles that we had in the Talos missiles. Even the new exoskeleton armor used and created the first version that people started creating, trying to create an Iron Man, if you will, a real life Iron Man, was named a Talos system. So I'd like to play a little bit of Iron Man, but just do it in your head right now so I don't get flagged. But here we have I am Bronze Man. Well, shortly after that they became with Iron, and it was even more than this. I am Iron Man. Is that this guy on the left, or is this the people on the right who created a monster? We talked about golums recently and how that's kind of a version of this same situation. In fact, that attached with a few things, and I watched this one show and I went, yeah, robots are much older than that, though. They're trying to come off like, hey, these guys here. No, that's not it. I mean, you could even say things like the Anacothera mechanism, even though it's a modern computer in a way, if you look at it, you do just wind up this little clockwork to a certain point, and then look here, and it can tell you a lot of things. One would say that's also artificial intelligence. Aristotle once was talking about slavery, and he kind of goes off subject, and he just goes on this tirade where he says, like, what if we had robots? What if we had mechanical looms that didn't require anything and they run themselves? All that were automated and everything, and all these things. We wouldn't even need slaves. And then he just drops the notion, goes off back on what he's talking about. One thinks, man, you could have made a longer thought process. You could have dwelled on that longer. Well, it was the Caucasians later from the same situation dwelled on it longer and done a lot of things, and we've automated it. But again, this is an ease of working situation where a lot of times you can take something, I don't know, like a cotton gin or something would have required a whole lot of workmanship to go into it, and they can make a machine just right with a lot of precision. Make note that all of these things we're talking about require a level of precision that by the gods, but require a level of precision. Whenever you get it down to that point, it becomes a simple task. It can do the work of hundreds of men. And you said something that back in the time here that we're looking at right now, and that's got to be by the gods. No. And then maybe now we realize what point we're at when we long ago had become master of beasts and so on in situation. What the Bible said happens when you eat of that tree that came from it. There's a good example, though, of good that comes from it, because a lot of bad comes from it in all these situations and everything. So, but Odysseus, at the end of his travels, meets an advanced king, and after relaying his plight and wooing to him and crying and so on and telling him what he's just trying to get home after more than 10 years, he actually sends him home in an automated ship that needs no sails or sailors. He can configure the route to him, and regardless of winds or everything, it will route itself. Kind of like the compass in Jack Sparrow's, if you will, but it's hooked up to the ship too. So it's like, oh, you take the Black Pearl, if you just set the compass there and then wanted that thing, boom, it'll go to where you're thinking. It'll go where you need to go. You think of geography and maps at the time and any way that a situation could go on and how many knots they could claim that something went and catch on and how that could possibly be in effect. Some of these things are ancient dreams, but now we actually have that situation where a shipwright now, with everything that's hooked up, knows what the hell he's doing. He can take your boat out and into the ocean and set point a plot, and it'll take you right there. Now they manually park it and do everything like that, and I think we'll continue to do that with cars even in here in the future whenever they make them manually go out. It's another thing I'll talk about here recently is, people are talking about electric cars and it's such a change, and it's like, did you know they had electric cars pretty much before gas cars? They just couldn't do a long distance, and once you got enough batteries in it to where you could, it was too heavy to even have the effect of it. Not something you could easily charge back up to because they didn't have much electricity in the areas, but gas is something, as long as you had more of it, you just pour it in there. You have gas stations, and here we go. Well, now we're talking about having electric stations. Even, in fact, places where when you drive on the highway, it'll auto charge you. Isn't that amazing? So when you think about the ancient tale of Prometheus and what we talked about too, actually he's the guy that's supposed to have built modern man, and then you think about it, they even show you on all the vases here where he's building it. It's just a skeleton where he's starting out with, and he ends up making a modern man. And then the stories of the Anunnaki and all these things, and how we're just puppets of the gods, and we were automatons built in their image in the first place. Isn't that a strange thought? One day I'll open up that box over there on the shelf, scoot the elf away, and talk about some of the things that are on there and connectives that can go, because there's still a lot to be unanswered, and so many times there are connections to planets and so on like that, that in a modern day everybody connects to aliens and things like that. But look here, we're talking about robots way BC, and it doesn't come on as brand new right then. Arcetus said he made a flying bird that's apparently steam powered, and it could fly over 600 feet, 300 foot football field. That's pretty darn good. Now, he probably couldn't put enough water into it and a big enough thing to hold the water and the heating device and so on. If he did, he had to make the whole thing larger and so on and so on. Well, how big did that heating device or whatever it is had to be to make the thing that's the eagle that we were talking about? Power sources. Some of these things are springs hooked up to cogs and wheels and held back pressure, pulling on a rope that's spinning something. But once it lets loose, you got to get back in there and tighten everything back up and get it reset, and then it can show off again. Like these early robots that we found, where it can come out and give a drink to you and stuff. You can have them where they write certain things out to you, compose music, it looks like little robots and stuff. Hopefully you've seen these, and these are more Renaissance type robots we're talking about. That's what that show talked about, and I'm like, well, that concept comes from a much earlier time where people already here were talking about Buck Rogery type of things in the Wayback Machine. Still, things that were envisioned by these people are coming about today. Tales of the amazing things that could happen, and perhaps talking about the gods being from space. Well, we're reaching that point and past it now. Really hope we get a move on, by the way, knock knock. But here we have that. What do you think about robots in space? The android in so many of these shows helps in so many ways, but also has caused problems in a lot of these movies due to the logic programmed into him in the first place, or ulterior motives too. Let me know what y'all think down there in the comments about it. I can't go into the plethora of things that I saw. My dad had an ancient book that had wonders of the world and stuff, and it talked about all these things with these birds and all these flutes and going down and little diagrams, and to drop a marble down and it had some water into it too, and this pressure, and he'd push and marble would come out and push down on this one deal to do this thing and release this thing that spin around, and the thing up top would now spin, and this would go on and that would do it. What the hell is going on? It's an ancient show-off device. It's an ancient robot. Like, share, and subscribe. Peace.